George P. Wakefield, 1910 to 2001. George Patterson Wakefield was born in Vermilion, Ohio, the son of Frederick William Wakefield and Mary Poley. He graduated from Vermilion High School in 1928 and attended Finn Engineering School, Cleveland, 1930 to 1932, and Ohio University in 1933. Mr. Wakefield retired in 1970 as chief engineer after 38 years of service with the F.W. Wakefield Brass Company in Vermilion. He held 18 lighting patents for the company, 4 private patents. He also had a career as a columnist and local historian. He was a columnist and poet for the Vermilion News, 1938 to 1964, and columnist for the Vermilion Photojournal, 1988 to 2001. His awards for writing include the Anchor Award from the Vermilion Chamber of Commerce for covering Vermilion history and the Great Lakes Fisherman's Tug Award for adding to the fishing history of Lake Erie. The following clips are from his Vermilion views in the Photojournal. Regatta River Scene. A regatta river scene in about 1924 shows the steam tugs mixed with pleasure boats. In the foreground is the steamer, C.A. Madison, at the coal dock, perhaps waiting for the 2 tugs, Joseph T. Sloat and Rainbow, to finish unloading their catch at the Kishman House. Just beyond the Fisher Lumber Company is the Tony Becker Concrete Block Factory, the old schoolhouse that originally stood where the town hall stands. Then comes the Leidheiser Fish Company with a couple of yachts tied to their dock. During regatta dock space was scarce, so commercial fishermen shared the space with the visiting yachtsmen. To the left in the photo is the primeval marsh where a slough ran back a couple of 100 feet, a great place to trap carp by forcing them to the bitter end. Another pastime we kids had along the riverfront. Between the steam tugs, the foreign yachtsmen from Rocky River, and the marsh, river kids had a world of their own. Not to mention the fishermen themselves who were characters to remember. I can recall a few I knew well: Jib Snyder, George Getz, George Parsons, Ott Full, Everett Thompson, John Nagel, Freddie Martinek, Bert Madison, George Showalter, Cliff Parsons, Fred Driscoll, Ed Lamp, George, Vern and Jack Leidheiser and Jack Morrison, all hardy fishermen. Apologies to Alva Snell, who is still cutting fish. By the Sea, by the Sea. Whenever I see a picture like this one, I think of that wild hit song of the 90s, By the Sea, by the Sea, oh, how happy I'll be. This scene along the beach at Crystal Beach Park in the 1912 period shows the shale cliffs in the background and the Crystal Beach toboggan, a breathtaking slide that scooted one screamingly down the incline into the lake where you came to a gentle sink as the water rose around. Some fun in those years, but it lacked the multiple thrills of a roller coaster and didn't require a bathing suit. So, the water device died a natural death, perhaps being washed out by a strong nor'easter. And while we are on location, a natural geological phenomenon is nearby. This is where the shale cliffs that dominate the eastern shore of Lake Erie dies and goes underground, allowing the beach sand to show all the way to the Detroit River. You also can see the force of the waves beating against the shale. It seems reasonable to expect a half-foot erosion per year from wave action. This would add up to 5,000 foot in 10,000 years as a conservative estimate. So, the lake has become larger over the ages. Again, as I view this postcard, what are the wild waves saying? It is erosion, erosion, erosion. Moonlight Mystery. This moonlight on Vermilion River, near Linwood Park, stopped me cold. Yes, I was stumped. Of course, I knew it was up the river, but where? There was not a sign of familiarity, and I thought I knew every scene of the river from the second shale bank to the lake. Well, what does one do when he doesn't know? Sure, see the expert. So I drove myself upstream to visit with Melvin Niggle. Now, Mel grew up on the upriver as I did on the downriver, so he knew exactly all about the postcard. Here is the solution to my stumpage. This scene is just beyond the first wash bank, a local term for shale bank, across the river from the Niggle property. The land at the lower right is the Niggle Beach. Across stream at the extreme right is an island that clearly shows on the topographic map of 1900. No wonder I was foiled. I had never seen this formation. In fact, it perhaps had disappeared when I was in the area because a Mr. Knighting owned the land and had felled trees on the land side which plugged the stream, thereby filling it with silt and brush. The natural island became a contiguous part of the Knighting land. We may have a clever method here of stealing an island, but for the two ladies in the canoe, their interest may have been less romantic under the glow of that moon. Card published by George P. Wall, made in Germany circa 1906. Merry Christmas and best wishes. Regatta custom lost in time. The boat club regattas in the 20s brought out a lot of inland sailors, as indicated by this fine picture of the lighthouse and the spectators. They came to watch the various classes race around a triangular course out front. This was the tail end of the great sailboat racing days sparked by the clipper ships and the America's Cup competition. I recall such races off Newport between Sir Thomas Lipton's Shamrocks and such American defenders as the Resolute and Vanity. They were magnificent yachts of extreme size and expense, the kind we'll never see again in this relatively poorer age. But they were something to see and imagine. That was my role as a child living along the lake. We built little models and raced them as cup defenders at the foot of Main Street, and I believe we had as much fun as the big boys with their monstrosities. The interest in betting was on the yachts then in their heyday. We kidders were about the last ones to have races with our defenders. Brother Albert raced with his friends, Ray Crozier and Jim Quidgley, the same way as did other boys before them. Ray Crozier had a model of a lake schooner that his dad had built, so they weren't too concerned about one designs or handicaps. Protest could have been common, though. So, this postcard with Vermilion's lovely lighthouse of the past, crowded with sailboat watchers, is a fashionable custom gone with the wind. Boat drive-in. Wooden boats and spruce spars parked at McGarvey's restaurant in 1938 offer some unique thoughts. Originally, this famous drive-in business was started in 1929 by Charles Helfrich. In those years, a delicious plate of perch and chips could be had for a modest price of 50 cents. The perch were fresh, right from one of the local shanties, and they were so good that they established a reputation almost as great as the Lake Erie whitefish of long ago. Do you remember seeing Lake Erie whitefish featured on menus in Chicago and New York? They were, and those Helfrich perch still bring back sweet gastronomic memories whenever I recall those happy days on the river. Now, how do you get similar responses from perch? Go buy yourself a boat and motor and fish for them when you can. Those were the days. For anyone not familiar with sailboats, nowadays boats are made of plastic and spars of aluminum, so there has been about as much change in boats as perch prices. While the quality of perch has declined, they have to come from Canada and the frozen state. The quality of boats has increased. These are the days. Scrapping the wagon bridge. Wagon bridge is falling down. Falling down? This picture was snapped by me in the early 30s with a 3A Kodak when the scrapping of the bridge was underway. To the left in the background can be seen the new bridge located north of the old. In between is the old Showalter boathouse where you could purchase a glass of cool, fresh buttermilk if you were so inclined. By the time the bridge was falling down, my guess would be that sales of this tasty liquid had also fallen down. To the right is an early romp boathouse before the lagoons were dug to the east. There is a sign on top of this building reading restaurant. This is one eating place I never knew, for I never had the pleasure of trying it. Perhaps it was because the walk to romps had been disrupted by the falling bridge. Bridges played an important part in the opening of the West to the pioneer settlers. There were two crossings of the river in 1810 to 1830, one at the mouth of the river where a fording was possible when the sands bridged the river mouth. Another was at Mill Hollow where a crossing was possible in the shallow waters there. Presumably this ford was the permanent one, for the one at the mouth depended on winds and river flow. A wooden bridge was built at the foot of Huron Street around 1830 but was washed out soon after. Building lake schooners. Vermilion's first industry consisted of building lake schooners, lovely three-masters, for 35 years from 1841 to 1876. It was a natural business since the virgin trees were all around and the farmers were clearing the land. It afforded plenty of hardy work in the winter when the farmers were normally quiescent. So, aided by the snow, skidding timbers out of the woods provided an excellent cash crop for pioneering farmers. Of course, the tremendous need for ships in the booming Midwest provided the basic incentive for shipbuilding in most all the rivers on the lakes. So, in the rush for ships, the little Vermilion port produced 46 large ships during the heyday. This photo puts you aboard a typical Great Lakes schooner in 1915 when they were getting very rare, the Edward E. Skeel. This should give you a feel of these big ships. The young lad to the left is Brother Al. The sailor at the right is a typical crew of the windjamming days. You are aboard ship standing near the cameraman. Do you get the feeling? As a local historian, my fondest hope someday is to discover a photograph of one of our schooners in the port, either building or just moored to the dock. Maybe this schooner snapshot will unearth a long, lost picture. Boats and bathing. This view from the lake of the Linwood Park Boathouse is interesting if one looks closely with a glass and uses his knowledge of local history. It was taken by a commercial photographer around 1900 and published for sale in Mr. Morey's souvenir stand. I presume Mr. Morey assisted the cameraman, or perhaps he was a freelancer, as some may have been in those days. First, the boathouse has a large sign in front which reads, "Boats and bathing suits." You could rent a rowboat for a nice ride in the lake or a swimsuit for a swim, simple pleasures in a bygone era. The boat would be skidded over the sand, and you could board it with your best gal with some unusual motions, I am certain. The swimsuit could be changed in one of those cubicles on the first floor, a novel thought today. Upstairs, you could purchase ice cream or lemonade to quench your thirst on the hot summer day. Look at the crowd with sun umbrellas awaiting the landing of the power launch to pick up more passengers, a squealing operation without a dock if it had been washed away in the gales of spring. I recognize the power boat as a very early type, and the one that was laid up near where Doc Stack lives today. It lay there discarded in the 20s, and we kids clambered all over it pretending we were at sea. From Notes by Ray. This is the same boat his father, Otto, ran off the beach with passengers. This is the main discovery I made in viewing this picture some 89 years later. Such is the value of an old photograph. Boating on the river in 1910. Boating on the river in 1910. What a contrasting view compared to present-day boat traffic on the river. Here the boats are lined up as in a pose for the photographer, while today a 2-minute stop in the river would cause a traffic jam so thick that one could walk across the river on adjoining boats. In reviewing this pic closely, I note that oars are in vogue as the outboard had not come to town yet. Rowboating was a courting process like the horse and buggy. A row up the river was a romantic sojourn into the realm of love. How nice it was to have a placid river to row, row, row on while flashing loving eyes at the beautiful girl in the back seat. The large motorboat at the left has stopped for the picture while the 5 sailors aboard hold still for the slow speed films of the day. Just to have a picture taken must have made the day for those fellows. The 2 gaff-rigged sloops at the right seem to be anchored out of the channel, perhaps to be away from the crowd at the old wooden pier. In the background are 2 shanties before my time along the river, maybe home to the squatters I have heard about over there. Such was the river 79 years ago. Photo courtesy of Ray and Karen Boas. The Leaning Tower. The Leaning Tower of Red River as seen by my 3A Kodak in 1928. How long would it have stood listing like that? Well, the Corps of Engineers didn't think long, for they came right in with their steam derrick barge, Erie, and took her down, hoisted the old girl apart piece by piece, and took her away to stand straight again as a proper lighthouse. Where, oh where, did she go? Some said down the St. Lawrence, and others up to Lake Michigan. But if you ask the Corps or the Coast Guard today, no one knows, and yet she is someplace on the lakes with her warning light protecting ships and being admired by the locals, as we admired our Queen, for a half a century out front. I recall Mr. Burns, the lighthouse tender around 1917, with his uniform and lightkeeper's cap with the metal placard above the peak. He seemed like a gentle soul devoted to his life's work as the keeper of the light. Let the lower lights, the pier headlights, keep burning was a popular song a long time ago and resulted from the loss of lives at the piers at Cleveland. So, Mr. Burns, what an appropriate name, did just that. Sorry, I don't have a photo of this faithful man, but his house at the southwest corner of Liberty and Grand Streets remains, along with a few memories of Mr. Burns. Perhaps now, you too, can visualize the old lighthouse and the keeper better with this nostalgic piece of yesteryear. Caught with the booty. In last week's Vermilion Views, you saw the leaning tower of the Red River, our part of town that was so quickly and ungraciously taken away to an unknown destination. Today we have a picture of the steam derrick that dismembered our beauty with a portion of the lighthouse showing on deck. Caught with the booty, one might say. Also in the picture is a gill netter arriving in port just as the camera was snapped. Perhaps some of the marine-minded fans can identify the boat. I have forgotten her name, so I never knew her well. In the background are the native trees that bordered that portion of the marsh, currently the location of the Vermilion Yacht Club. The graffiti on the end of the stone pier is interesting. CG 142 and Patrick, Coast Guard Cutter 142, which was stationed here in the 20s and a member of the crew, Patrick. That name rings a small bell in my memory file. Those were the days of enforced prohibition with all the expense and clamor. Does that also ring a bell? Simple days, simple fun. In 1926, the South Shore Regatta still had an entertainment program along the riverfront which reflected the same water sports of 1916, so it must have been popular. Here we see an audience on the pier in the marsh. as thousands more lined the docks from the pier to Kishman Fish Company. People came from far and wide to see the boats and watch the kids try their skills in the water, all amateurs and full of fun, but still competitive. Such antics as canoe races, tail-end canoe race, which is seen in the photo, balloon race where the paddler had to swat the balloon along, man overboard race where one had to dive overboard and then climb aboard, usually capsizing the canoe, was a thriller, and finally a tug-of-war using hands as paddles. Oh, such simple fun in such simple days. How the crowd loved it. Peals of laughter followed each capsize, which seemed to be the highlight of each event. This picture is of special interest and surprise to Bill Williams, who will find himself at the bottom left corner. He still knows how hard it is to paddle a canoe the wrong way. The changing times. This photo, taken in 1924, is a similar view to the one of last week and nicely illustrates the changing times along the riverfront since 1904, a 20-year span. We have a clear view of the Kishman docks with two lonely boats left over from the South Shore Regatta. The owners had to skip back to work via the Lake Shore Electric to Cleveland. They would return later for a leisurely cruise back to home port. The first powerboat is the Harmony, owned by an old-timer from the city who attended all the regattas at Vermilion and Put-in Bay. I knew him and the boat because of their constancy. The Algest astern was another of the oldies, but I cannot recall her name, just the shape. Then comes the Fisher residence hidden behind the trees. The dock was of poured concrete resting on wooden piles. At low water we could see the foundation. Upriver to the left in the picture is a large wooden building of historic interest. It was the old school that stood where the town hall now stands. It was moved down next to the Kishman house for Bert Parsons' fish shanty. Then about 1900 moved to where we see it in the photo, at the foot of Toledo Street. The last building is, of course, the Leidheiser Brothers Fish Company, which burned down in the 50s. What remains of this riverfront? A bushy tree just to the right of the center to perhaps mark the site of the lumber unloading dock of 1904, or maybe the stone dock of 1870. Fisherman's pride. As we approach another festival of the fish, here is a charming photo of one of the early patriotic, floating floats of another day. This one is dated circa 1910, when the village was a real fishing town. In those years, the river was a busy place with a dozen or more steam tugs, several gas boats and trap netters moving in and out of the river. Those were fish-producing years from 1880 to 1950. Tons of lovely, fresh whitefish, blue pike, saugers, walleye, perch, cisco, and catfish were harvested by the local fishermen. Vermilion was one of the larger producers on Lake Erie for over half a century, so it is no wonder the lure of fishing and fish lingers on in the old town. This float intrigues me, for it has the real taste of patriotism, a display of fishermen's pride of their profession and the fervor of a parade. The body of the float is a real wooden lifeboat, a vestige of the port's life-saving facility. Note the pilot house with Captain Flint Nichols in it, the boiler with a stack simulating a steam tug. There is a net puller hoisting reel twine aboard at the bow. I even see a propeller sticking out at the stern. The third man at the bow is none other than Squire Williams, the mayor. I knew many of these fishermen, but they are hard to identify. Are there any others known by the town folks? I'll list them in the next views if you call the Vermilion Photojournal. A sailing fisherman. Here is a rare postcard thanks to Pam Seymour of Heidelberg Beach. It came to me through the manager of the Vermilion Boat Club, Karen Matthews, who has provided many fine cards in the past, so I am grateful to both. This card is the first, and I believe the only one, that shows a sailing fisherman coming in the harbor to unload fish. The date is circa 1896 as indicated by the steam tug, Charles P. Stricker, built in 1892, and the fact that the waterworks is not showing. The photograph was taken from the Kishman dock with the sailboat making a landing. She is a typical flat-bottom, centerboard, trap netter, rigged with double cat, sprit sails. That is my definition, for I have never heard a local fisherman's description of this type. I believe she is the same boat I climbed aboard after she was abandoned and sunk opposite the old Driscoll fish shanty, Parsons today, around 1919. Those were my sculling days when I knew every dock and boat in the river. To the left of the sailor is the steam tug Stricker. Then Rainey's shanty, sail loft today. To the right is the Giddings house possibly. The duplex hot water heating company building, Reed Wakefield's today, and Tom Ball's shanty with the lime kilns stack peeking over the top, Dr. Stack's today. What a thrill to find a picture like this early river scene. Note about last week's picture, the floating float. New names added to the list of known crew, starting at bow and going aft: Mr. Brown, Bill Shifley, Harry Williams, Marv Shriver, Hank Pelton, Flint Nichols, Dave Stevens, Jimmy Halloran, seated, Charlie Barber, in back of Halloran, and Charlie Decker, standing on the ground. The date appears to be 1900, not 1910. We now have the original photo thanks to BT. The metal lifeboat must be the same one that rusted away at the end of Ferry Street in 1918. Photographic magic on glass plates. Jake Abel was one of our town's early photographers and an interesting character. His profession was barbering in his shop, now the captain's chair. But it was in the back room where he practiced his photographic magic, which, in those years, was a novel and exciting art. It was soon to become a stylish fad, providing studios in most towns and cities in the country. This was the period after the Civil War when the silver glass technique skyrocketed like radios in the 20s. Consequently, Jake Abel recorded a lot of Vermilion history on his glass plates. This picture of the boulder and children looking out on the lake at the foot of Main Street is the first of a series of Abel pictures we will be running for the next several weeks about our town. We can thank Ding and Jeannie Jeffrey for this review, since they have saved some of Jake's vast collection. Most were broken and trashed, so we are grateful for these few shots of early Vermilion town. Not knowing the children in this photo, little can be said of them, but the picture is truly a piece of art for the composition. The big stone, the children in their various activities, and the pier, the red lighthouse, and even a sailing fisherman going out of the river. The real mystery, though, is how could a massive boulder like this disappear from the beach? The original article picture that was copied from the microfilm was of poor quality. Rich Tarrant of the Vermilion History Museum provided a picture of better clarity that was taken very close to the same time as the original. A good guess would be that the second picture was taken from the top of the back steps of the Doll Building. The flood of 1913. The big flood of 1913 caused quite a disturbance among the fish boats in the river and the animals living in the marsh. But compared to what it would do today, it was trivial, a mere strong current in the river that simmered down overnight. Prior to 1825, when the land in the river drainage area was wooded with virginal timber and native grasses, this massive absorbent morass slowed down the rainfall runoff, perhaps even eliminating overbank flooding. I'll even bet the water was also mostly clear rather than mud-laden we see in freshets today. So, what have we done to the old river? We have set her up for floodings and freshets while dumping our good earth into the lake, forever lost to production by the farmer. Can't blame the farmer 'cause we gotta eat. So it is a dilemma. This photo gives us a view from Liberty Street of the 1913 flood. You are standing overlooking the Moe's Marina and looking eastward to Linwood Park. I can see the houses there and the trees. With a glass, let me describe the detail. The building on the right is Dahl's garage, which was built on piles. In the foreground, center, an old hulk of a gas boat lies rotting. This area is a marsh, unused land. In the water left of center are two boats. The first is the hull of the steam fish tug, Favorite, formerly owned by Bert Parsons, and the other one an unknown gas gill netter. To the right is the steamer, William D. Ames, owned by Fred Driscoll laying at his dock, the Driscoll Fish Company. There are a couple of trap netters hanging on at the dock. At the willow tree before the Ames is the pilot house of the Favorite, gasping its last breath, ending her fishing days. 1894 to 1913. A normal life for a wooden tug. A last vestige of this tug remains, her cast iron propeller owned by the Parsons family. Raising the Ice House. This postcard from the Abel collection stumped me at first, for I was not familiar with the event. After a considerable study and memory review, I have concluded the photo is the raising of the southern portion of the Leidheiser Fish Company icehouse next to Liberty Street on the east side of Toledo, land now owned by the Vermilion Boat Club. My confusion was prompted by the gin pole and winch, not building or location, that appears to be lifting the roof. The three men in the foreground I cannot name, but their postures are familiar, and I often saw them in trap netters or along the riverside. Standing before the ice cakes are Vern Leidheiser with his beaver cap, pitchfork, and son, Ken. Kids sitting on the ice posing for the photographer appear to be in precarious positions, but the excitement caused by a picture taker, man, puts safety awry. My guess at the date is 1919, and not a souvenir remains of the place unless it is a pair of ice tongs rusting away in someone's basement. Around 1900, when fishing was the town's largest employer, there were 7 ice houses in the harbor: Rainey's, Kishman's, Parsons, Edson and Nichols, Leidheiser's, Driscoll's, and Lamps. Ice harvest time in the winter was a regular fisherman's regatta, a fun time in the winter doldrums. Angling for catfish. George Kropp was the best catfish hook and liner on the Vermilion River in the 20s that I observed. George Getz was the best trout line catfisherman. The difference between the two was profit and fun, but in a sense, both enjoyed their fishing. George Kropp, with his 2 sons, Harvey and Herbert, would be seen many a time after supper walking down to the pier with long cane poles, a can of bait, and large dip net. George would have his regular cigar gripped tightly in his teeth as he sauntered along with a face of expectation. They would stop about halfway to the lighthouse, bait hooks, and set the poles between the pier stones. Bait would consist of a heap of dangling night crawlers on a large hook with a cotton line, the kind the gill netters used to string twine. About 2 feet up the line was a large lead sinker which steadied the set and put a slight bend in the pole. The bait then would hold still 1 or 2 feet from the bottom, just close enough for any cruising cat to stop and gulp the whole gaggle of worms. When George's watchful eye caught a slight up and down motion on the pole, he set the hook with a hearty lift. By then Herb or Harv would jump for the dip net for Dad's big one, which took 5 or 10 minutes of tense fun before the Kropp team made a landing. Walking home, a subtle grin was visible on George's face, for he had added another cat to his summer list. In the photo is the champ with his cane pole and catch, while Herb has a problem just holding his 17-pounder off the ground. Thanks to Esther Kropp Jackson, who learned about cats from her dad. Kishman Hill World War I action. This is a 1918 scene showing a World War I tank demonstrating its maneuverability by going down the Kishman Hill. I imagine the prime test was climbing back. At any rate, this tank was developed to kill machine gun nests that took such a devastating toll of men at the front, Ypres, Vimy Ridge, etc. It was equipped with a machine gun to go in with armor protection and wipe out the enemy's machine gun. I vaguely recall this tank, so I don't believe I was among the excited boys atop the cork-drying shed. They would be in the age class of Don Lawless, Shooter, Trinter, and Pop Nicholas. It must have been an eventful day, all part of the Liberty Bond drive to aid the war effort. In the background is a fine picture of the marsh. It has had its annual burn-off, so the old path running from opposite Ferry Street to Linwood Park is visible. This ferry route was used before the Cloudy Knoll Run established around 1905. The burning of the marsh grass, usually started by a fisherman across from the Driscoll Fish Company, Parsons Marina today, produced a blue haze that permeated the village, but everyone knew it was just the marsh and considered it a natural phenomenon. No big deal. We can thank Earl Childs for this action photo. He was the cashier at the Erie County Bank, Berks today, and played the cornet in the Grand Army of the Republic Band. Incidentally, speaking of blue haze, in those years we sometimes smelled the sweet aroma of burning pine forest fires in Michigan. River characters and their antics. George Roberts ran a store at Liberty and Sandusky and heard many a yarn from local fishermen, mainly Ed Lamp, Cloudy, Knoll, and Tubby Appleman. They are worth repeating, for these three were prominent characters. Big Ed Lamp, known as the strong man on the South Shore, was coming in from fishing and lost his steerage due to a broken rudder. This didn't stop Ed from running his course homeward. He tossed 2 fish boxes overboard with a line on each and reined her in. Ed said it was just like driving a team of horses backwards. Another story at the riverside occurred when some fellows were trying to lift an engine from a boat. Ed volunteered to help. He said, "Put the chain around the engine and over my neck." He stooped over as the chain was applied and straightened up. Out came the engine. Ed was a big guy, and the stories of his feats of strength cover the lakes like the steam fish tugs used to. He had massive hands, too, to grab hold of things. George said his hands were as large as the wheel on an auto. See how stories grow about a strong man, just like that lumberman, Paul Bunyan. Cloudy Knoll used to room above the Moe's building on Liberty Street, and George ran the store just to the east. One day Cloudy's stepson came over and charged a loaf of bread. Cloudy came back shortly and told George, "Hey, I don't like that white powder bread. How come you sold it to the boy?" George replied, "I didn't sell it to him. He just picked it up and charged it. If you don't like the powder bread, bring it back and I'll exchange it." Cloudy hesitated a bit and said, "It's half gone." Harvey Ditzler lived in the old Schutmaler house, about where the convenience store is today. There was a long hall in the center of the house, and every time Harvey came out of his room, Tubby Appleman, a visitor that day, would shoot off a skyrocket. It would zoom down the hall, scaring the hell out of old Harv. This horseplay made him pretty mad, so he complained to Mayor Williams about it. The good squire, realizing that such tomfoolery had to stop, took up the phone and called Tubby. "Appleman, this is the mayor. I want you to stop shooting off skyrockets at Harvey." Tubby's reply was, "Williams, you may be the mayor up there, but I'm the mayor down here." He then hung up. Such were some of the antics of the river characters we had in the wondrous 20s. George said he never knew a town with so many oddballs. Maybe this is another record we hold. Picture caption: Steam Tug Days. March 15th, when the tugs go out, was springtime in Vermilion. Captain Charlie Horton is on the pilot house looking for a soft way out to set the first nets. Circa 1912. Trap netting crew and catch. Fish and fishermen. In 1905, trap netters were busy catching fish along the south shore of Lake Erie. This photo, taken from the bow of a rainy trap netter, is a rare picture as it shows the catch, the crew, and the old-time gas engines so common in those years. The boat is a former sailing fisherman, flat-bottomed, with centerboard and two Lego mutton sails. Sort of a double-rigged catboat, which proved to be the most practical of rigs for a longshore work. The big fellow aft of the engine holds the steering stick in his right hand as he intently pilots the boat to port. The gentleman at the left is the owner of the fish company, Cornelius John Rainey. The Rainey Fish Company was founded in Cleveland around 1860 by Willett Phineas Rainey. He was originally a lumberman, trader, and Indian friend of Washington Island, Wisconsin. The company had fish houses in Port Clinton, Huron, Vermilion, Lorain, Cleveland, Erie, and Dunkirk, so it was a large fish producer. After World War I, the business went bankrupt, mainly due to the money owed to the company from the government for fish produced during the war years. Some $1 million was involved. The Rainey Fish House was the present-day sail loft, which we river youngsters called Rainey Shanty. The East End, which has been torn down, was the living space for the crew members of the several tugs that fished out of Vermilion in the first decade of the 20th century. The peak of that building was where the daredevil teenagers made their high dives to plunge in the deep water at the dock. Don Lawless and Pop Nichols were two devils, I recall. But that shanty was empty then and a fun house for the river kids. Wondrous riverfront characters. This snapshot was taken in 1917 aboard the new steam gillnetter, Edward K. The two crew members, Captain Bert Madison on the right and Turk, Needing at the left, are washing or setting twine. They usually set off the stern, as I recall. At any rate, let me introduce you to the two gentlemen as I knew them when I grew up along the riverside. Bert, the old man, is pulling the twine from a net box on deck and leading it to Turk, who spreads it as it runs out to the water aft. If washing, then a chap at the stern pulls it in after its cleansing bath in the moving water. The chief, George Parsons, has slowed the triple expansion engine down to slow so the K is doing about 3 miles an hour. This makes it easy on the chap retrieving the twine at the stern. Bert Madison was a chubby sort of fellow who smoked a pipe continually and appeared to be good-natured. He joined in with the crew at work and play, so the boat's ambience was pleasant. His eyes were always partially closed, which seemed to me they grew that way from searching for his net stakes. I have noticed this same look in the eyes of other fishermen, that searching, distant gaze. Bert always let us kids scramble aboard for a short ride to the fish unloading dock, so Bert rated well with the river rats. Turk Needing was a fun fellow, a great kidder and storyteller. He gave me my first job as deckhand on his Jim C. We loaded farmers at Crystal Beach and ran them for a scenic trip up the river and back. For some, it was their first venture on the lake, so the event was very popular. How did Turk get Turk for a moniker? Johnny Trinter told me this yarn. Turk and another chap were hunting on that island in Old Woman Creek. Turk spotted a large turkey in the bush and banged away at the surprising prize. How did he know it was a domestic? The owner arrived, and Turk had to buy it as well as his nickname, which lasted all his life. Bert and Turk were two more of those wondrous characters of the riverfront we boys knew in the 20s.
Still looking for more Vermilion history? Then you need to visit the Vermilion History Museum. located at 727 Grand Street in Vermilion, Ohio, where old news is good news. Just a few of their many artifacts. Iron Cannonball. This iron ball made at the Iron Works at Furnace Corners, near Route 60 and Darrow Roads just south of Vermilion, around the time of the American Civil War. There are several at the museum compliments of Jim and Candy Fisher. One, not pictured, is not as compact or round as this one. It must have been a throwaway. Each weighs between 7 to 10 pounds. Rag Rug Maker. This contraption used scraps of fabric cut into 2-inch squares and tied them on a twine to form a row. Then pinned the form row to make a coil, like a braided rug, and continued adding to the coil until the rug is the size desired. It was finished by sewing coils together. Today we throw our scraps in the trash and purchase rag rugs for a few bucks at the dollar store. This was found in the attic of the museum. Railroad electrical items. The telegraph key is familiar to many, but very little is known by anyone at the museum at this time about the other items. 2 are meters apparently used to measure things like voltage, the strength of current in a circuit. Both were used for an unknown purpose on the Nickel Plate Railroad south of town. The function of the other item is not known, but appears to be related to the use of electricity by railroad workers who watched and controlled the signals on the road. These items, along with a glass batter jar, not pictured, were used by railroaders and farmers in the yesteryear, were donated to the museum by David and Ginny Wilkes. So stop by and visit for Vermilion history.